I'll go back to you on this one point briefly. So accelerated approvals, as Bikash said, development gets everything is accelerated. Today, even if you're not on a special pathway, things, because of shareholders and the way the market is, everything is accelerated. Um, so how does that affect the technical side? And you and I spoke when I asked you if you'd kindly join this panel, that you're not quality and you're not regulatory, and that's good. That's someone we wanted on the panel. So when you're dealing from a technical standpoint and small molecule or whatever, how does that affect the relationship, or what strategies can you use when things have to be sped up so much?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. So, when you're trying to go first in human, everything is about being as fast as possible. So you have to manage things in a phase appropriate way. So for like in the instance of regulatory starting materials, a lot of the times what you'll do is the manufacturer that is manufacturing your active ingredient will then purchase the regulatory starting materials for you, or you can choose to do them yourself as the sponsor company. Both strategies are used. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll use just the C of A of the product when it comes in and release it based on that. And that's fine for phase one. But what can happen is if you're going on an accelerated pathway and you go into phase two, even if you're not on an accelerated pathway, what we're starting to see now is certain countries are asking a lot of questions about the quality aspects of your regulatory starting material, even in phase two. They want to know that there's no impurities coming through there that are going to track through to the API. And that becomes even more so if you're on an accelerated pathway. You would have to know exactly what impurities are in there. You need to know how they purge in the process. And so in order to do that, you need to have transparency into how they were made. And you have to have really well characterized starting materials. You need to know the impurity profile. And that's very difficult to do if you don't have that transparency. So you can do it yourself by purchasing yourself, or make sure that whatever manufacturer you're using, they have that transparency right from the very beginning, so you'll be prepared.
Mm-hmm. How do you work with the CDMO to ensure that they have that transparency? Do you put it in a contract, or is it just a matter of managing relationships?
You really have to be dependent on your quality agreement. I think that's going to be a huge part of it. From a technical perspective, there's certain questions that you can ask right away, like, okay, if you're going to purchase these starting materials for me, what is your relationship with that CMO? What is your agreement with them? Does that supplier, can they tell me how the starting materials are made, or is that proprietary? Because in some cases, they actually won't tell you. Can we do some sort of release testing when it comes in? And earlier phase of development, you would do a basic release testing, sort of just impurity, purity and identification. You wouldn't necessarily need to know what all the impurities are in early phase, but then as you go through layers of phases of development, you're going to need that. It would be also good to know if the supplier has analytical capabilities in the event that you need to trace what an impurity was. Something catches you by surprise later on, and you need to learn what it is. Is the manufacturer of that starting material going to be able to do all the technical work to determine what those impurities are, and the analytical work as well? So knowing if they have those capabilities, I think, could be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Thank you for answering that. Christine or Carla, would you like to weigh in on this, or we can move to something else?
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in just a little bit. I think what Aaron said is really spot on, and it goes back to what Bikash has also said. I mean, I think there's one way that you at the early stages of development should define a target product profile, and that document can be really clearly state what you're trying to serve, what your minimum specifications are, what the relationship that you have with the supplier of your ingredients, your APIs, et cetera. and whether or not there's an alternative source. This will also lead to potential supply chain issues in the future. So getting all this down and with your, defining your choice of ingredients and where they're coming from and maybe some alternatives, and defining that in a target product profile is probably probably a really good thing. And then to follow up with what Erin said, a quality technical agreement is probably something that should be put together so that we can be agreed upon by sponsor and the CDMO, your contract organization. I just think those things are really prudent to have in place and will ensure clear communication and define expectations up front before you start.
Very good.
Yeah, if I could, I completely agree with you, Christine, on this. We find that, the most API manufacturers, they know how to make the drug, right? The issue becomes when you start layering in the quality and the regulatory conversation. So when you begin to start talking about ICHQ7, and at what point does the GMP part of my process begin? And we start talking about what are we going to define as our final intermediate in this before we get to our API. And now the control strategy needs to be created. This is oftentimes, for some API manufacturers, surprising. Folks that support pharma, not so much, but it's a core component. It's going to be in your QoS. It's going to be in Module 2 going forward there. And you want to have a contract partner that is familiar and understands that, because just as you will do in the drug product, you need to put together a control strategy and a defensible control strategy for the different steps of the GMP part of the reagent synthesis process there. And that gets even murkier if you start thinking about some of these continuous processes like flow chemistries, which have been used for forever, because there are processes where the intermediates are highly energetic and there's no other way to do it but with flow chemistry. But what becomes a final intermediate? What is the control strategy around the CQAs you're going to measure there? Because it's continuous. It is a more complicated quality and regulatory question there. Having a CDMO partner that's familiar with your obligations in the IND is helpful at the outset when you're evaluating someone that's capable of it, just beyond just the monograph requirements. But, do they really understand what their obligations are to support the filing?